Imagine descending 1,000 feet into the dark, suffocating earth of the Appalachian Mountains in the year 1891. The air is thick with coal dust and the rhythmic thud of pickaxes, until suddenly the sound changes. Instead of a dull strike against soft carbon, a miner hits something hollow, something resonant. Behind a crumbled wall of coal, they find a chamber, not of stone and dirt, but of smooth geometric precision. Inside, sitting in a silent, eternal circle, are beings that should not exist. Massive, 9-foot skeletons surrounded by artifacts that emit a faint, impossible glow. Before the next shift can even begin, the order comes down from the surface: weld the entrance shut. For over 130 years, the coal industry and the Smithsonian have told us this was a myth. But the archives tell a different story. A story of a lost empire and the giants who built it. The year is 1891. The location is the Monongahela Valley, nestled between the growing industrial hubs of Fairmont and Morgantown, West Virginia. At this moment in history, the world is hungry for coal. The Industrial Revolution is a machine that never sleeps, and West Virginia is its beating heart. But as the shafts went deeper than ever before, the miners began to find things that didn't fit the geological record. According to local law and whispered accounts from the era, one specific deep shaft operation breached a pre-industrial vault that defied explanation. It wasn't a cave, it was an engineered room with smooth metallic walls housing the remains of humanoids ranging from 7 to 9 feet tall. Reports claimed these giants were found with strange artifacts, objects that seemingly held a residual, phosphorescent light long after the lanterns were extinguished. Then, just as quickly as the discovery was made, the site was sanitized, records were altered, and the chamber was permanently sealed behind a wall of steel. Why would a profitable mining conglomerate abandon a rich seam of coal just to hide a few old bones? To understand why they hid these giants, we first have to look at the official story, the sanitized version of history we were taught in school. If you ask a mainstream historian about the giants of West Virginia, they will give you a very standard scripted answer. They'll tell you that the late 19th century was the era of yellow journalism, a time when newspapers like the Wheeling Intelligencer were desperate to sell copies and would invent tall tales about buried cities and prehistoric monsters to entertain a bored public. They want you to believe that every miner who saw a 9-foot skeleton was either a liar, a drunk, or a victim of a grand hoax. But when we look closer at the specific details of the 1891 incident, the official skepticism begins to fall apart. Let's talk about the most glaring technical red flag: the welding anomaly. The legend of the Fairmont discovery explicitly states that the entrance to the giant's chamber was welded shut immediately after the discovery. On the surface, that sounds like a typical detail. But let's look at the timeline of human invention. Electric arc welding was only patented by Nicolai Bernados in 1887. In 1891, this was not a common tool you'd find in a dusty Appalachian tool shed. It was cutting-edge, experimental technology, essentially the quantum computing of its day. How did a local coal company in a rural mountain range have the specialized high-voltage equipment and the trained personnel to perform a deep shaft weld on short notice? If this story is true, those weren't just common miners. They were likely an elite recovery team, a 19th century version of Men in Black, using advanced technology to seal a breach in the narrative. Then, there is the issue of the vanishing records. If you go to the West Virginia State Archives today and look for geological surveys of the Monongahela Valley from the early 1890s, you will find a curious pattern of missing pages and redacted reports. Why are the most profitable years of the Fairmont coal boom shrouded in administrative mystery? The official story says it's just poor record keeping or fire damage, but researchers have found that while the mundane payroll records survived, the specific maps showing the deepest shafts, the ones that would have hit the vault, are consistently absent. It's almost as if someone went through the books with a fine-toothed comb to remove any mention of the anomalous masonry encountered during the dig. Even more suspicious is the timeline of mine abandonments. In 1891, coal was literally black gold, yet several high-yield shafts in the region were suddenly backfilled or closed due to instability or bad air, despite having years of coal left in the seams. Was the air truly bad, or had they breached a pocket of history that the authorities weren't ready for the public to breathe? If the giants weren't real, why does the 19th century record of West Virginia keep mentioning them? And more importantly, why do the clues point toward a high-tech cover-up that shouldn't have been possible with the tools of the time? To find the truth, we have to look past the legends and into the actual primary sources. Because the 1891 mine discovery didn't happen in a vacuum. It was the underground climax of a mystery that had been documented by the highest levels of the American government for over a century. Let's start with one of the most credible witnesses in American history, Thomas Jefferson. In 1785, long before he was president, Jefferson published a book called Notes on the State of Virginia. At the time, West Virginia was still part of Virginia, and Jefferson was obsessed with the massive earthworks and burial mounds that dotted the Ohio River Valley. He performed what many consider the first scientific archaeological dig in America. Jefferson documented these mounds as remnants of a vast, organized civilization. While he was careful with his words, his private notes and later accounts from his contemporaries described the discovery of skeletons that defied modern proportions. Jefferson proved that the 1891 mine discovery wasn't just a tall tale, it was the discovery of the lower levels of a massive, multi-layered civilization that lived both above and below the Appalachian soil. But Jefferson was just the beginning. A century later, the government's interest in these giants moved from curiosity to an organized institutional effort to collect and archive them. In 1887, just 4 years before the Fairmont mine was sealed, the Smithsonian Institution published the 5th annual report of the Bureau of Ethnology. This is not a conspiracy blog. This is an official federal document. In this report, a researcher named Cyrus Thomas detailed the excavation of several mounds in Kanawha County, West Virginia. He explicitly describes finding a skeleton in a stone-lined vault that measured exactly 7 feet 6 inches tall. Think about that. 7.5 feet tall. The report notes that the skull was extraordinarily large and the frame was massive. This was a documented historical discovery of a large person found in a sophisticated burial chamber. But here is the smoking gun. If you go to the Smithsonian today and ask to see the Kanawha giant, they will tell you it doesn't exist. They will say the bones were misplaced, crumbled to dust, or were misidentified. These reports were published for the world to see, and then, almost overnight, the physical evidence vanished into a black hole of bureaucracy. This establishes a clear chain of custody that leads directly from the mounds of West Virginia to the locked basements of the Smithsonian. Even the mainstream media of the time couldn't keep a lid on it. If you look at the archives of the New York Times, specifically the edition from February 11, 1902, you'll find an article titled Giants of Other Days. The article describes the discovery of remains in a nearby region that were nearly 9 feet tall. It mentions well-preserved skeletons with double rows of teeth and copper ornaments. Wait, double rows of teeth? This is a detail that appears in accounts of giants all over the world, from the mountains of Tibet to the deserts of Nevada. It suggests a completely different biological lineage than modern Homo sapiens. During this era, historians began using a new term, the Adena culture. They told us these were just Native Americans who liked to build mounds. But Tartarian researchers believed the name Adena was a convenient label, a way to rebrand the survivors of an older, grander world. They want us to think of the Adena as primitive people carrying baskets of dirt. But the 1891 mine discovery tells a different story. It tells of smooth, geometric chambers buried deep beneath the earth. Chambers that required advanced engineering to reach and advanced technology to seal. What if the mounds weren't just graves, but the ventilation shafts or entry points for the massive underground complex that the miners accidentally breached? The Smithsonian's own reports prove the giants were real. The New York Times proves the public knew about them. So why was the Fairmont Vault welded shut and scrubbed from the map? Because these weren't just tall humans. They were the architects of a global system that the 1800s reset sought to erase from our collective memory. They weren't just part of our past. They were the citizens of a civilization we now call Tartaria. To understand the 1891 discovery, we have to zoom out and look at the world through a different lens. In the traditional narrative, West Virginia is just coal country, a rugged, isolated wilderness. But in the Tartarian framework, this region was something else entirely. It was the high ground of the Appalachian Plateau, a strategic, mountainous stronghold for a global civilization that existed long before the current timeline was established. Researchers of the Great Reset, or the mud flood theory, suggest that between 1850 and 1920, a cataclysmic event, possibly a localized plasma discharge or a massive liquefaction of the Earth, wiped out the previous era's infrastructure. What we call coal mining in the late 19th century may have actually started as a massive recovery operation. They weren't just looking for fuel, they were excavating the buried remains of the old world. Think about the description of that chamber in 1891. It wasn't described as a rough hewn cave. The witnesses spoke of smooth, metallic, or perfectly geometric walls. This is a hallmark of Tartarian masonry. If you look at star forts across Europe and the Americas, you see this same impossible precision. These structures weren't just defensive fortifications. Many believe they were massive power plants, utilizing atmospheric energy to provide light and heat to a global population. The Chamber of Giants found by the miners was likely one of the lower-level bunkers or power hubs for this network. When the miners breached that wall, they didn't just find a grave, they found a pressurized, preserved piece of Tartarian technology. This explains the glow reported by the miners. Some researchers believe the giants possessed a form of cold light or bioluminescent technology that didn't require combustion. In a world before the light bulb was perfected, finding a room that lit itself would have been terrifying to the establishment. If the public found out that free energy was already a reality, the burgeoning oil and coal monopolies of the 1890s would have collapsed overnight. But why were the giants there, deep underground? In the Tartaria narrative, these beings were not monsters. They were the guardians, the high-ranking citizens or engineers of the old world. Because of their stature and physiology, they were biologically optimized for a world with different atmospheric pressure or a higher oxygen content. When the cataclysm, the mud flood, began to settle, these individuals likely retreated to hardened underground chambers. They weren't just buried there. They were waiting. They were sealed in to survive a surface-level purge. The miners in 1891 didn't just stumble upon a cemetery. They breached a time capsule. And here is where it gets even more provocative. What if the coal we've been burning for 150 years isn't just compressed ancient forests? Some theorists suggest that the massive seams of anthracite found in the Appalachian Range are actually the carbonized remains of the old world's organic technology. Vast forests of silica-based trees and massive structures of living stone were crushed and cooked under the weight of the mud flood, leaving behind the energy-rich carbon we mine today. When those Fairmont miners hit that hollow sound, they had moved through the carbonized debris and struck a piece of the original, uncrushed Tartarian infrastructure. They found a room that had survived the pressure. They found the people who built the world we were supposed to inherit. The giants were often found sitting in circles, sometimes holding metallic rods or stone tablets. This suggests a ritualistic or technological purpose. Were they trying to restart the grid? Were they in a state of suspended animation that was interrupted by a 19th century pickaxe? The response from the powers that be was immediate. At the time, the world was being partitioned by the global elite, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and the burgeoning scientific institutions like the Smithsonian. These groups were busy constructing a new history, a story of evolution and primitive ancestors. A story where humans started from nothing and slowly worked their way up to the steam engine. A 9-foot-tall giant sitting in a technologically advanced, self-illuminating vault in West Virginia destroys that story instantly. It proves that we are not the pinnacle of progress. It proves that we are the descendants of a superior race that was wiped out and replaced. The welding of that door wasn't just about safety. It was a symbolic act of shutting the door on our true heritage. They couldn't allow the miners to talk. They couldn't allow the artifacts to be photographed. This is why the 1891 incident is so critical. It represents a moment where the New World Order almost lost control of the narrative. They had to act fast, using experimental technology to seal a leak in their manufactured version of reality. We are told that West Virginia is a land of simple mountain folk and coal miners. But if the Tartarian theory is correct, it is actually a massive overgrown graveyard for a civilization that reached heights we are only now beginning to imagine. The mounds on the surface were the markers, the mines below were the reality, and the giants were the bridge between the two. What if the reason the Industrial Revolution started so heavily in this region wasn't because of the natural resources, but because they were looting the technological corpse of Tartaria? Think about the massive stone bridges and ornate railway stations built in the late 1800s. We are told they were built by men with horses and pulleys. But look at the precision. Look at the scale. Does it look like the work of people who just discovered coal? Or does it look like they were repairing a system that was already there? When the miners hit that chamber in 1891, they stopped being miners and became witnesses to a crime. The crime of our stolen history. If this was just a 19th century cover-up, the story would have ended when the world cooled. But the evidence of the West Virginia giants didn't stop in 1891. It simply moved into the realm of modern surveillance and industrial accidents. In recent years, independent researchers using ground-penetrating radar, or GPR, have conducted unofficial surveys near the remaining mounds in the Ohio River Valley. In places like Moundsville, the radar has picked up massive voids, perfectly rectangular rooms located hundreds of feet below the surface. These aren't natural caverns. Nature doesn't build in 90-degree angles. Why aren't these voids being excavated? Why is the academic community so silent when modern technology proves there is more beneath the soil than just dirt? The answer may lie in the concept of no-go zones. In the heart of Appalachia, there are thousands of acres of land owned by the Department of Energy and major coal conglomerates. Many of these sites are classified as reclaimed mine lands, and they are strictly off-limits to the public. Some of these abandoned shafts in West Virginia are rumored to be under 24/7 electronic surveillance. Why would a bankrupt coal mine from the 1920s need modern motion sensors and high-security fencing? What if they aren't keeping people out for their safety? What if they are guarding a hollow they never managed to fill? We also have to look at the suspicious use of mine fires to close off large sections of the underground world. Take the case of Centralia, Pennsylvania, just across the border. A trash fire supposedly ignited a coal seam in 1962, and it has been burning ever since. The government evacuated the entire town and leveled the buildings. But researchers have noted that the burn zones often align with historical reports of anomalous masonry or giant sightings in the 19th century papers. Is a mine fire a convenient, permanent way to use scorched earth tactics against the truth? You can't investigate a chamber of giants if the entire mountain is a 500-degree furnace. There are whispers from modern-day miners in the Monongahela Valley, men who have worked the deep seams for 40 years. They speak of Section 8 orders, where a drill bit hits a metallic obstruction that shouldn't be there, and the entire section is immediately walled off with concrete. They are told it's a gas pocket or unstable shale, but the miners know the difference between shale and the sound of diamond-tipped steel hitting a structural beam. Who benefits from this ongoing silence? The Department of Energy, the Smithsonian, and the global energy cartels are all part of a structure that relies on us believing that coal and oil are our only options. If we found what the 1891 miners found, a source of light and energy that has lasted for centuries without a single wire, the entire modern world as we know it would become obsolete in an afternoon. The truth is still down there, vibrating beneath the mountains. They can weld the doors and they can burn the coal, but they can't change the fact that the earth in West Virginia is hollow and it's filled with the bones of kings. Why does a story from 1891 matter to us today? Why should we care about a few sealed doors in a forgotten coal mine? Because this isn't just about bones. It is about the Darwinian monopoly on our reality. If we accept that giants existed, beings with different biology and superior technology, then the entire timeline of primitive human evolution collapses like a house of cards. We are taught that the Industrial Revolution was our greatest leap forward. But the evidence in West Virginia suggests it was actually a recovery mission for a lost world's scrap metal. The existence of the Chamber of Giants poses a direct threat to the modern energy grid. The descriptions of self-illuminating crystals and metallic conductors aren't just fantasy, they are the blueprints for a world that doesn't need a monthly utility bill. If we rediscovered the Tartarian energy secrets, the multi-trillion-dollar oil, coal, and nuclear industries would vanish overnight. The global elite who manage these resources don't hide giants because they're scary, they hide them because they represent freedom. Institutions like the Smithsonian were founded at the exact moment the old world was being buried. They were the architects of the new history, tasked with making sure we never looked too closely at the mounds or the mines. By keeping us focused on a primitive past, they ensure we remain primitive in our dependence on their systems. They want you to believe that you are the most advanced human to ever live, so you won't realize how much has been taken from you. Every time a modern researcher is denied a permit to dig, or a miner is told to keep his mouth shut about a metallic wall, the weld is reinforced. They didn't just weld a door in 1891. They welded our eyes shut. They replaced a world of giants and free energy with a world of fossil fuels and historical amnesia. But the weld is starting to rust. With every leak, every digitized newspaper archive, and every independent GPR scan, the light from that chamber is beginning to bleed through the cracks. The truth is, we aren't the first advanced civilization to walk the Appalachian trails. We are just the first ones to be told that we're alone. The story of the 1891 Fairmont discovery is more than just a ghost story from the coal mines. It is a portal into a history that was never meant to be seen. From the monumental earthworks documented by Thomas Jefferson to the 7-foot skeletons lost by the Smithsonian, the evidence is etched into the very soil of West Virginia. The giants were real. The chambers were engineered. And the cover-up was a calculated strike against the memory of humanity. They can redact the reports and they can seal the shafts, but they cannot stop the truth from vibrating beneath our feet. The deeper we dig, the more the official story crumbles. And as the Great Reset of the 19th century loses its grip on our minds, we have to wonder, what else is waiting for us in the dark? Now, I want to hear from you. Have you explored the old shafts of Appalachia or seen the strange voids in the ancient mounds? What do you think is truly behind that 1891 weld? Leave a comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe as we continue to unearth the hidden history of Tartaria. Stay curious, because the past is bigger than they told you. Literally.